briefly describe an aid to interpretation which is very commonly referred to as the mischief rule. Now, before I deal with one or two judgments which squarely fall or turn on the application of the mischief rule, what I do want you to know is that you will find in judgments which talk about contextual interpretation or when they apply purposive interpretation, they oftentimes also use the mischief rule as part of context and as part of purpose. So please don't get thrown off and avoid any rigid compartmentalization. But that said, in its classical formulation, the mischief rule was really enunciated in Haydn's case in the 16th century. These are the four components of the mischief rule, and I'll quickly read them out from here. Really, these are the questions that the court is asking itself to identify what is the mischief that the statute in question sought to remedy. And by answering that question, using the answers as an aid to interpreting the statute that is before the court for interpretation. So the first question is, what was the common law before the making of the act? That means, what is the position in law? Of course, the way the question is framed over here is what was the common law, but the question would apply equally to what was the codified law before the making of the act. What was the mischief and defect for which the common law did not provide? That means, what was the lacuna? What was the deficiency? What was the inadequacy of the common law or the earlier codified law? Then, third, what remedy the Parliament hath resolved and appointed to cure the disease of the Commonwealth? That is, what is it? And this is something to be ascertained from the Act itself, or perhaps in some cases from committee reports which have led to the enactment of the Act. That is, what is the remedy that the Parliament has in mind for the purposes of curing the mischief identified in the second question or the second limb of this mischief formulation. And the last is the true reason of the remedy. And then the office of all the judge is to always to make such construction as shall suppress the mischief and advance the remedy. So this is really the mischief rule in its classical formulation. Now, one or two examples of this mischief rule. Let me take one example of the mischief rule in the case of Badshah versus Urmila Badshah. So the judgment of the Supreme Court in the case of Badshah versus Urmila Badshah was dealing with a socio-economic legislation. And the question before the court was, what is the meaning of a wife within section 125 of the CRPC? Now, the facts in that case are a little bit important to understand how they applied the mischief rule. The relationship between husband and wife over there was such that the husband had not obtained a valid divorce or any divorce from that matter in respect of an earlier marriage. Therefore, there is no doubt that the second lady with whom he had purported to get married would not be a wife within the meaning of Hindu law, and that was the applicable personal law to the parties. And the court had to nevertheless consider the question that when we look at the language of section 125, does it mean wife in the sense of a legal wife? That means an individual who can legally proclaim to be a wife, which would of course require the earlier marriage to be duly annulled or dissolved, or there to be a valid divorce. Or when you look at a provision such as section 125 as part of social legislation, does it really apply more to a relationship between two individuals that partakes the character of husband and wife? And especially in the facts of that case, where the second lady is an innocent lady who had no idea about there being an earlier marriage. And the judgment in Badshah's case, paragraph 16 to 22, and the Supreme Court applying the mischief rule of interpretation said that what is the mischief that is sought to be remedied over here by section 125? The mischief that is sought to be remedied by section 125 is that you cannot leave a lady destitute, without any maintenance, without any financial support. And really, in a sense, over here, the court does not even undertake an analysis of what was the common law position before the CRPC was enacted. But it looks at what it thought would be the obvious mischief sought to be cured by a provision such as Section 125. After they get into the mischief rule, closer towards paragraphs 21 and 22, they discuss the development of Hindu law and the manifest purpose of various enactments to achieve social objectives, to paragraph 22, where ultimately they talk about empathy for weaker sections like women and children must inform the interpretation, and the interpretation must have social relevance. And this is really a quote from an earlier judgment. So it is by keeping all of these societal factors in mind that they construe Section 125 of the CRPC liberally. The issue over here in this case was whether a liquor shop or a liquor store located inside a mall could be considered as a standalone liquor store for the purposes of the relaxation of the COVID pandemic unlock guidelines. It's as contemporary and as relevant as one. Now, in the judgment, there were various guidelines that were issued for the opening up of liquor stores. The guidelines indicated that liquor stores that were standalone or standalone shops could be opened up. But if they were located inside malls, they could not be opened up. Now, all of us who live in Bombay would have driven past the CR2 mall in Nariman Point. And as you would have noticed, there is a brand new liquor store which is operating inside or as part of the CR2 mall. If one was to apply these guidelines in their plainest sense, then the liquor store inside a mall would not be allowed to operate even for the purposes of home delivery because it is located inside a mall. Now, I think it's important for me to make this, and I want you to notice the language by which the unlocking of liquor stores was permitted, because the language was very clear that it clearly did not apply to stores inside malls. And at page 3 of the judgment, the relevant language is, as per paragraph 7(1)(d) of the central government order, all shops except malls in rural areas and standalone shops, colony shops, and shops in residential complexes, except malls and marketplaces, are allowed to be started. So malls were not permitted to be started. Then in the next part of the guideline, again the important words are, as regards retail liquor stores in urban areas, malls, market complexes and liquor shops will not be allowed in the municipal and municipal limits. Similarly, all types of standalone retail liquor shops, colony shops and residential complexes can be started in urban areas except for containment zones. However, in all metropolitan areas of MMR as well as in so-and-so, standalone retail liquor shops, colony shops and shops in residential complexes are located. A maximum of 5 shops can be opened in other, a maximum of 5 shops can be opened in other shops, whatever sense that makes. And then if you go, there is another guideline which was issued on the 22nd of May, which you will find in the judgment a little bit lower down as part of Roman 4, which spoke of the government of Maharashtra has allowed liquor shops to effect sale of permit holders through delivery of liquor at the permit holder's residential address, subject to the conditions specified in the said order. So the long and short, as confusing as it may be, the long and short of these guidelines was that if your liquor shops are standalone, then they can be opened for the purposes of home delivery. But if your liquor shop is in a mall, it cannot be opened even for the purposes of home delivery. Now, with these guidelines, the court had to consider whether the liquor shop at the CR2 mall could be allowed to effect home delivery. And this is what the court says at paragraph 9 of the judgment. It says, we have heard the submissions in detail and perused the record. In our opinion, in the facts of the present case, it is critical to evaluate the intent of the guidelines, notifications and orders issued by the state and or respondents. From a perusal of the same, it is evident that their intent is to curb the spread of novel COVID-19 virus by ensuring that people maintain the norms pertaining to social distancing and in the process secure the interests of the public. The economic impact strain that has been caused and continues to be caused by the lockdown is common knowledge. To provide some relief to the public, the state has permitted businesses to operate without adhering to the norms of social distancing and other protective measures. Then, what the court does in paragraph 10 is that it actually analyzes that even if this particular liquor store is inside a mall by the name World Wines, would its opening up satisfy the intent requirement of the relaxation guidelines? And after setting out the photographs, you will find in paragraph 11, evidently the entrance to the petitioner's shop is separate and independent of the entrance of CR2 Mall. A perusal of the layout to the petitioner's shop in the above photograph shows that the petitioner's shop does not rely on the opening or the entry stroke exit to the CR2 Mall for its operations. This is not a case where the shop is actually situated inside the mall, meaning thereby that one does not have to actually enter the CR2 Mall or go through their checkpost in order to enter the petitioner's shop. Ingress and egress is directly from the main road, etc. And we agree with the submissions of counsel that it is in all aspects akin to a standalone shop. And then it goes on to say it does not fall within a containment zone. And the last few lines, the intent of the guidelines issued by the state is in not allowing the operation of businesses situated inside malls is to ensure that too many people do not gather in one place where it would be difficult to follow the norms of social distancing. We do not see how permitting the petitioners to operate their businesses from the said shop, which has a separate and independent entrance and exit, and does not in any way rely on the entrance or exit of the gate, making it akin to a standalone shop, not fall within the relaxation. And then it goes on to say in the last part, in matters such as the present case, the approach of the respondents needs to be practical rather than technical. So this, again, is, I think, a very current and contemporary illustration of how the decision of the court was determined entirely by a purposive or an intent-based approach. There's no doubt that if the court had to take a plain language or a literalist approach, a shop in a mall is a shop in a mall. It doesn't matter whether you have a standalone entry to it or whether you have to enter from inside the mall. But what is interesting is that for the purposes of getting the benefit of the relaxation guidelines, the court interpreted the guidelines to say that this is akin to a standalone shop. But let me take the point a little bit further on how interesting interpretation can be. Suppose, for example, there was a legislation which said that electricity supplied to a mall or to shops in a mall will be at a concessional rate for whatever reasons, because you want to incentivize people to take retail space in a mall. Could the state deprive the benefit of such a concession to a shop such as the present shop on the premise that although you are in the mall, there is entry from outside and therefore you will not get the benefit of electricity at a concessional rate? The point that I'm trying to make is that the argument that the shop has got entry from outside and therefore must get the benefit is a compelling argument in one context, but in a different context is an argument that must fail. So really, when you apply these kinds of arguments of do we treat it as being a shop in a mall or do we treat it as being a shop which is in a mall but actually a standalone shop, the entire flavor of the argument and the likelihood of the court accepting the argument depends upon the circumstances in which that argument is being made. Now,